Hey, what's up guys, BenzoFigures here, and today I will be going over how I made this Jason figure for Multiversus. With that being said, let's begin. So, I've been playing a ton of Multiversus lately, and as a former Jason main back in Season 1, it was a pretty rough time. But many can agree that this design is awesome. It's like someone took a pre-Uber Jason design and just stretched them out, and it surprisingly works. If you also play Multiversus, let me know who you guys main as. Back in Season 1, Jason was my main. In Season 2, Samurai Jack was my new main character, even though he got nerfed to the ground. Season 3 just started. Powerpuff Girls is alright, but I still like playing as Samurai Jack and Banana Guard. So, in order to make this figure, I had a few ideas floating around. I primarily work with Marvel Legends and other Hasbro figures, because most of their parts fit together. Also helps the fact that Hasbro has been making figures for like over a decade now, so there's lots of characters and pieces to choose from. I know I could have easily bought a NECA Jason figure and called it a day, but what I think makes this design so great is his menacing silhouette. So now begins the search. In particular, I've been eyeballing these three big boys to make this happen. So candidate number 1, Mr. Joe Fixit. So while theory crafting, the idea is that Mr. Fixit already has paint close enough, and the dark blue sleeves are ideal just in case there's paint rub, just to hide it better. But now taking a closer look, even though he is a pretty big boy, he doesn't really have that wide and menacing silhouette that I'm looking for. So I guess it was better in my head, but this was a bust. Candidate number 2, Kingpin. Kingpin is perfect. A bit too perfect. He has the silhouette, the size, pretty much everything I could ask for. I think the only downside is that the scarf piece around his neck would be a pain to cut down and reshape with clay. I was ready to carve up this figure to make Jason, but I don't know. I'm not quite ready to part ways with this awesome figure. But there's one more in mind. Candidate number 3, Mr. Hyde. So you might think I'm pretty crazy to carve up a build-up figure just for a custom, but to be honest, I bought the MCU Shang-Chi wave because I really like that movie, and I have no idea who Mr. Hyde was in Marvel. Plus, because of the jacket, the legs keep popping off of him, so I'm not too big of a fan of this figure to begin with. He definitely has his size and silhouette. Taking off the jacket, sanding down the torso would be pretty easy. Yeah, I think I can work with this. So I'm going to use Mr. Hyde as a base, but with some parts of Kingpin. Good thing about Retro Kingpin is that he comes with a spare head, so I could still keep this Kingpin figure intact while I could go ahead and make this custom. With both of these figures fusion danced together, here's the base as a concept. Yeah, it looks nothing like it, but there's definitely potential. But what will ultimately bring this all together is if I could get the mask just right. For this, I'm using a 2-part epoxy clay and mixing equal parts of Compound A and Compound B. I tried to find a NECA head sculpt for Jason online, but people were selling it for the price of the whole ass figure, so I just decided to take the Kingpin head and sculpt it. Which is probably for the better, as I could sculpt the head in a cartoony style and make it a bit more rounder. No lie, I've been dreading this process of sculpting since the mask will either break it or make this figure come together. I wouldn't say I'm a Jason fan since I've only seen a handful of his movies. I'm more of a Jason enjoyer. Yeah, let's go with that. I've seen the first movie and the third movie. Also remember seeing Jason X. Freddy vs. Jason, I actually like that one a lot, I'm not gonna lie. And the one that came out a couple years ago that rebooted the franchise. This might be a controversial take, but out of all the Jason movies, the reboot's my favorite one. Yeah, I know, probably a bad take, but no lie, that was a lot of fun. But yeah, let me know which one was your favorite Jason movie. Anywho, I want to say that this mask is based off of the first appearance of the hockey mask from Friday 3, since the pattern's pretty similar. Obviously it's not a one-to-one recreation of the Friday 3 mask, but it does seem pretty close enough. Since his Build-A-Figure has a lot of texture, and Multiversus Jason just has a plain shirt on, I'm going to be using this Dremel to sand down all the texture. This Dremel tool in particular that I'm using is pretty good at taking large parts off, which saves so much more time than just using sandpaper. So, as I'm sanding away, I'm trying to make this look as basic as possible. I don't need to sand it down completely, since the design is mostly covered up by the large chain and jacket. But I do want to strip away just enough texture so it'll be easier to hide all the smaller details with the darker paint. So, joint prepping, my least favorite thing about customizing figures. This process is a bit of a pain, but it is super important. So typically, when you put paint on a figure's joint and it rubs against another part of the plastic, it will rub the paint right off, hence why it's called paint rub. It's super common for figures to have paint rub if you don't sand down the joints and allow a small gap in between the plastics so the paint doesn't come right off. The process is a pain, but I get it. Super important to do. I don't have to like it, but I get it. So after an hour of being rained on with microplastics, I am back at my office and I'm going to use this Gundam pen to mark down any particular details I want to either add or remove. Using an STL file of Jason, I was able to get a better idea of what the model looks like all around, and base my markings down with that. So even though this Kingpin jacket is close, Jason doesn't really wear a fancy tuxedo. So I'm going to be marking down where I should add clay to transform this jacket. I'm also going to be drawing on where I want to cut and tatter and make holes in the jacket at. No lie, this part was pretty fun to do. Now that the coat is drawn all over, I'm using an X-Acto blade to trim the coat. Admittingly, the coat is a lot thicker than I thought it was going to be, so I had a bit of a hard time cutting through. It probably doesn't help the fact that I haven't changed the blade in months, but it is what it is. No lie, I do get a little impatient with the cutting process since the blade is dull, that I end up just ripping the pieces out. I'm surprised I didn't tear too much off, and it all worked out in the end. After tattering the jacket, time to fix the jacket up now. The plan is to extend this collar thing, I don't know what it's called, and make it a little bit more accurate to the design, changing it from a tuxedo to a weathered jacket. I'm not the best at sculpting, and I could have probably cleaned this up a bit better, but oh well, live and learn. Using some sculpting tools, I tried to shape it up and at least follow my line art. I can always smooth it out with some water so my fingerprints aren't all over the figure. I've always had a hard time working with green stuff clay. When combined, the texture is like working with chewed up bubblegum, and it just sticks to my tools and hands. I don't know how people do it, but I opted to use green stuff because it's more malleable than your regular 2-part epoxy. When it dries, green stuff is actually pretty flexible, so whenever the jacket has to flex or move, the clay parts will move along with it and not break apart. So, now the boring stuff, priming. I actually like priming a lot. It's pretty therapeutic and it's pretty satisfying watching the figure slowly fade to black. I used to not prime my figures for the longest time, and I can officially say that priming really does help with the painting process. The primer helps the paint stick onto the figure easier, and I end up using less coats of paint. So here's a photo of the figure all primed and assembled. I wanted to see if the recipe was working, and yeah, after seeing this, I knew I was on the right path. Now, finally getting to paint the figure. I know there's a bunch of model paints out there, and after trying out a few, Vallejo is still my favorite one to use. Mostly because their paint is thin to begin with, and it comes in these eyedropper bottles. I do have a couple of Citadel paints, and while they do offer a bunch of colors, I don't really like the container. I think their new paints do come in eyedrop containers, so I might have to go revisit them, but anywho, I already know I'm going to be using 2 or 3 layers of paint to cover the primer. So the goal for the first layer is just to assign what colors go to what part of the figure. That way, this gives me an idea of what the figure is going to look like, and I can always adjust the colors from there. Although, going into this project, I already knew what colors I wanted to use. For the jacket, I'm going to be using Mahogany Brown. Mahogany Brown is my favorite brown to use, because it has a hint of red and it really pops out. I use it for hair, clothing, so it's pretty versatile. So yeah, I'll be using this for the jacket and sleeves. For the shirt, I'll be using German Gray. German Gray is like a really dark gray, where it's almost black. I like using this over black sometimes, if I want the figure to have dark clothes, but still have some shadows to show over it. For the pants, I want to make the pants dark, but with a hint of a blue shade. So to achieve this, I'm mixing German Gray and Prussian Blue. For the mask, I didn't want the mask to look like it just got out of the production line. I still wanted it to look a little bit worn. So instead of white, I used Bone White. It's still bright, but with a hint of a warmer color to it. So usually I like using this matte sealant by Mr. Spray Clear, but unfortunately it's been raining non-stop in my area and it's been humid as hell all the time. It's been like this for months, so instead of waiting around, I opted to try this paint on varnish. No lie, the first coat looked hella glossy even after it dried. The second coat looked less glossy, but I didn't want to clog the figure with a third coat of varnish. I think 2 coats of varnish will do for now, just to help protect the paint, and a month from now, when the weather gets better, I'll go ahead and use a sealant spray to top it off. You know how long I've been waiting for this? Assembling the figure is the funnest part. I knew when I assembled it when it was prime that it was coming along pretty well together. Wow, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I think this came out pretty awesome. It looks pretty spot on for Multiversus, and wow, I still can't believe I made this. Just for fun, let's scale Jason with other figures from other lines. Overall, I'm pretty proud of this. Let me know what you guys think, and let me know what other Multiversus characters I should make next. Drop a like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.